Okay, looks like people are coming in, so I will get started with our introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Shake Worry, and I serve as the programs manager for the DC Preservation League. I'm joined today by our fabulous presenter, Naomi Ryan, and by my coworker, Zachary Burt, who is running the live stream on Facebook. So if you're joining us there, welcome to you as well. For those of you who may be new to DCPL, we are a Washington, D.C. citywide nonprofit founded in 1971 that is dedicated to preserving, protecting, and enhancing the historic built environment of the nation's capital. I have just a few things to go over before we get started. First, I'd like to start by taking a moment to acknowledge some of DCPL's top sponsors, whose annual financial support helps underwrite free programs like this one today. They are the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, QTAC Rock, Douglas Development Corporation, Atlantic Refinishing and Restoration, Intunovich Associates, Buyer Blender Bell, EHT Traceries Inc., and KCE Structural Engineers. Thank you all for your dedication to historic preservation in DC. So moving on, just a few notes on how today's webinar will run. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go through those towards the end of the program. The chat won't be available during the presentations, but we'll open it for the discussion period so you can submit your questions and your thoughts there as well towards the end. But if you have a question come into your head during the presentation, just put it into the Q&A box and we'll ask it at the end. If you're joining us on Facebook, you can submit your questions in the comments box there, and Zach will send them to us over here on Zoom. So now that we've covered our housekeeping items, I'm so pleased to introduce you to today's speaker. Naomi Ryan is a project manager and historic preservation specialist for Consigli Construction, working on historic rehabilitation projects. She's previously rehabilitated a 1903 Freedman's Cottage while living in Charleston, South Carolina, and recently purchased an 1893 Victorian home with a lot of potential in Alexandria, Virginia. She holds a master's in historic preservation from Clemson University. So thank you, Naomi, for being here and for being such a great support to DCPL over the years, and we're excited for you to be here and to hear your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Shay. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I do work for a construction company, but just to clarify things a little bit, my company focuses on large institutional clients like government agencies, museums, schools, those kinds of things. So today's presentation is a little bit more personal, a little bit more about my experiences with my historic homes that I've worked on. So you bought a historic house. And now what? The topics that I'm going to cover today is a little bit about inspections, prioritizing your repairs, common building materials and agents of deterioration, best practices, and of course, everyone's favorite topic, I'm not made of money. So inspections. Really important for you to be aware that when you are purchasing a historic property, you should get an inspection. I understand some mortgage companies don't require an inspection. I don't care. Get an inspection. These will help you to discover things like rot or termites or just very obvious kinds of things like that that might not be quite so obvious to you. You do have to know the limitations of an inspection by a professional home inspector. They don't get on the roof. They're not going to crawl in the crawl space. They're going to really stick to what they can see from walking around the house. So I recommend a second inspection by you, the homeowner. That's me in my little Tyvek suit. They cost about $15. I have a hard hat on because I'm going in the crawl space and you never know what kind of nails you're going to find, and also a mask. If I was going back under there today, I'd wear a respirator because there were a lot of mouse droppings. And I really recommend that you get in there and really go into those spaces and take a look. You don't have to be an expert in construction to see when something looks a little funny. If you see something that's rotted or you see what looks like little holes in something, you might guess that there might have been termite damage or something, and you can decide whether or not you need to have that looked at further. In this case, I did go under my house. I discovered why I had sagging floors in certain areas. It's because the bricks have completely fallen apart. Does not require intimate knowledge of historic properties to know that. They were literally piles of dust on the ground. So when you're prioritizing your repairs, it's really important to think about outside in, right? Water is your number one enemy when you have a historic property. It's always, always, always going to be an issue if water from the outside gets into your building. Well, water from inside your building, in your building, is also problematic at times, but more critical, exterior. So you want to make sure your roof is in good shape, your foundation and your exterior walls are in good condition, your doors and windows are good, and that then you move into your interior spaces. Insofar as roofing in our region, we pretty much have just a handful of roofing styles. We have materials. We have slate. We have turn metal. This could also include copper and terracotta shingles. And then we also obviously have a lot of asphalt shingles that were not historic, but some of our buildings do have them. So I'm going to talk about them just a little bit. Now, the thing about our historic materials is that they really last a long time. A slate roof can last upwards of 100 years. Turn metal roof, if it's well maintained, can also last upwards of 70 years. Terracotta shingles, as long as you're not in an area that gets a lot of hail, you can last for a really long time that way as well. This goes into also then the amounts of maintenance that they're going to need, as well as the cost when they need to be replaced. So when we're looking at our roofs, we do find a number of agents of deterioration. And things that we find a lot are pieces that are missing. Sometimes this happens when we do get a hailstorm. You might be missing some pieces of your terracotta shingles, or you might lose a slate tile or two. That's something to really keep an eye on. It's always, always, always easier to catch something early and make a small repair than it is to replace the whole thing. Biological growth, and this is things like molds and mildews, mosses, trees. I have seen trees growing outside of people's roofs before. Just anything that grows, you want to make sure that it's not on your roof. Delamination. So if you see the second row there on the left, that slate is delaminating. There is a little bit of this that might happen over the course of time. There happen to be some newer slates where this has become an issue. So replacement roofs where people had delamination a lot sooner than they would have anticipated, but definitely not something that we see too much of. Usually either you get a batch or you don't. So then we have damage from things like hail, tree limbs falling on it, someone throwing a baseball against it. Corrosion for our metal roofs. A turn metal roof is a metal roof that's been covered with a layer of lead. And if that lead corrodes, or if you don't keep the topping membrane up to date, you can lead to corrosion underneath. Copper corrodes as well, not in the same way. What we know as copper corrosion, we actually usually call it patina. And some people think it might actually protect the copper from further deterioration. And then, of course, we have our coating failures and our failures of our flashings and of our joint sealants and things like that. Flashing is a material that's used to help span a gap in your materials. So where you have a corner, you would have a piece of flashing underneath your roofing materials to help guide the water away from your substrate below. Your substrate below in most areas around here is going to be wood, either plywood if it's been re-roofed recently, or something like skip sheathing where you have your structural membranes and then pieces of wood that span across them. And then, of course, gutters. Gutters don't tend to be typical on early period homes, but if you have a Victorian, you might have internal gutters or you might have external gutters, and those are important to keep maintaining. For your foundation and your exterior walls, obviously your foundation has a little bit more criticality in this regard. If your foundation is failing, the rest of the house is kind of on its way out. So it's really, really important. We often see brick and stone. We do see some wood, and we also see concrete. Concrete can be something that was done in the beginning. We're moving into a period where our mid-century modern homes are historic, and so they might be built on a concrete slab. And then the other materials have been used throughout the course of time. We see a lot of failure of bricks where you have the stair stepping where the cracks are within the mortar, generally that's a little bit of just subtle subsidence of the soil, and you don't have to worry about it as much as if you see the bricks split right through the middle. And probably one of the biggest problems with our historic brick is that people have, over the course of the 20th century, used Portland cement-based materials to repoint them, and that can lead to failure in the brick itself. So we do see some subsidence, and there's a good example of stair-step bricks. That may or may not be a problem. The person who can tell you is a structural engineer. Sometimes people are very shocked that, oh my gosh, that gap is huge, but it's not an issue. If it's stable, if it hasn't moved in 50, 60, 70 years, it might not be a problem at all. The only issue there would probably be water getting into those cracks. So a little repointing, and you might be able to just leave it just like that. Of course, we have the failure of coating systems like paints. We have cracking, rotting, spalling, which is the bricks in the center there. And that's usually caused when you do have that really hard Portland cement mortar. It doesn't allow the water to come out through the mortar, and so instead makes its way out through the face of the brick, eventually shearing that front face off. And you often find it's very crumbly inside when that happens. Efflorescence, which is the bottom right image, that's where the salts inherent either in the materials or in the water from the rain in our area come through the material and make their way to the surface through differential pressure between the water inside and outside of the brick. It's usually a powdery white look. And then to the left, we see biological growth. Once again, mold, mildew, moss, all kinds of little, plant-like critters that grow on the surface of our materials. And then, of course, we have our doors and our windows. We have wood doors, and a lot of wood doors in our historic buildings are single pane. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We also have steel windows in our early industrial buildings, as well as some residential buildings. Aluminum, which is a little less common in this area than it is further down south. And then, of course, our lovely vinyl non-historic windows. So the biggest issue people usually have with their windows is that they're sagging or they're not working. You can't lift them up. They're not easy to open. And that's usually a function of a failure within the window frame of the sash and pulley system. And that is fixable. You would need to find a window restoration company, and there are many, many people out there doing window restoration, and I'm going to recommend to you guys the Window Restoration Alliance. They have a list of all their members, and they can help you to repair your historic windows. We also have things like broken glass, failures of the glazing putty. If you look on the left side there in the middle, that piece that's kind of brown, that's where the putty has failed. And that's a really easy repair, and it is something you can actually do as a homeowner. Then there's things like rot and corrosion and failed gaskets. Now, the failed gaskets here, I'm referring to your vinyl windows. The real problem with vinyl windows, in addition to getting rid of our historic windows, is that they are meant to fail. In 20 or 30 years at most, they will fail. So my house that I bought, the 1893 Victorian, they replaced all the windows in the 1990s with wooden, true divided light, double insulated window panes. And unfortunately, every single gasket has failed. And there's no way to fix them. The wood is of such low quality that it's not even worth patching and fixing and just replacing the glass pieces. So something to keep in mind about the energy efficiency, which all the ads for window restoration companies all tout the energy efficiency and the reduction in your home heating costs. You really need to stop and think about that. That's a marketing ploy based on people's misunderstanding of the R-value rating system. So a rating system, the R-value rating system is not, is based on percentages. So one R value, one step up is 100% better than the previous one. However, the R value of a single pane wood window in good repair hovers around 1. The R value of a brand new vinyl window with double insulated glass hovers around 2. The R value of your walls is around 15. So if you think about that, we've got a little bit of improvement here, but it's nowhere near what it would be if we didn't have a hole in our wall. So it's always going to be a source of energy loss. The best things to do if you have your historic windows, you can install an interior storm window, which is a second pane of glass that goes inside of your house. They make them from every conceivable material, from beautiful wooden framed pieces to simple plastic ones that you can actually twist in place and pop in and out whenever you want to. And then you make sure that all of your materials are in good shape. You make sure that your glazing putty is in good condition. Any joint sealants you might have are in good shape. Your paint is in good condition. And if you have any damaged elements, get them fixed. A wood window can be fixed an innumerable number of times and never have to be completely replaced unless you let it get too far gone. But then I would hope you would replace it with another wood window. All right, and then interiors. Now, our interiors of our buildings, we see a lot of plaster, we see a lot of wood, mostly in millwork, sometimes paneling, and we have a lot of brick. Now, the brick that we see on interiors tends to be structural brick that was never intended to be seen. I'm going to talk about that for a brief minute in just a second here. And then, of course, we have ceramic tiles. Some people have stone on the interiors of their homes, those kinds of things. I think I may have skipped something there. Okay, so when we have plaster, a lot of people with plaster walls, they're concerned because they have evidence of plaster failure. Plaster is not something that can be readily fixed by the homeowner, but there are ways to fix plaster. If you have a small piece of damage on your plaster, you can bring in a professional and they can use something called plaster board. It looks like drywall, it is not drywall. And they can cut the damaged area out in a nice square shape, and they can do a parge over it with new plaster and get it looking like it wasn't anything was there. If you have more serious deterioration of the plaster, as in the plaster is literally peeling off the walls, there is a way to reattach the plaster with some screws. It's not pretty. It's usually done in a pure stabilization capacity. But if it's really gone, you might not be able to save the plaster. Always best to try to address plaster issues before they get to that point. With regards to wood, some of you have older buildings that maybe didn't even have any kind of air conditioning or heating systems in them when they were first built. And the problem that we found, and probably if you have this issue, it already happened a long time ago, is that the way air conditioning and heating systems work, they play with the humidity in the space a lot. And so a big problem that we find is paneling and larger spans of wood that have cracked over the course of time due to the forced expansion and contraction in a different humidity environment than that wood was used to before the HVAC system was installed. Our historic brick that was originally structural, and now everyone wants to expose the brick. I love the look too, Shay. I can see it behind you in your house. The only issue with that, for those of you who've never been through that experience, is that this material was never meant to be seen. It's usually bricks that are not of as high a quality as the ones that would have been used on the exterior surface of a home that was meant to be seen by the public. So you'll sometimes find bricks that are a little bit softer. And also bricks are separated by mortar. They're held in place by mortar, and then there's something called pointing mortar, which goes between the bricks in the last inch or so of the face of the structure of the brick. That stuff is meant to deteriorate over the course of time. It's meant to take the shock and the movement of the structure and kind of crumble out of there. And so if you crumble out of there, you're always going to have crumbles, i.e. dust all over your floor. Big controversy about whether or not to seal bricks on the interior of your building. People sometimes take ideas about the exterior building and bring them to the interior. There are some sealants that allow vapor permeability. They allow the movement of water through the surface of the brick. And honestly, I don't know how you live with exposed brick without doing something to keep too much of that crumbling from happening. The other option, of course, is to put plaster back on it and have a beautiful plaster wall like the original builders intended. And then ceramic tile. Ceramic tile is one of those surfaces. It's really, really hard wearing. It's lovely, but it does sometimes break. The issues are usually where someone has had a fixture installed on the surface and then they go to move it, or you drop something and it breaks. You can find matching historic vintage ceramic tile. There are resources for that in architectural salvage stores all over the country. In this area, I'm particularly familiar with Community Forklift in Hyattsville and Second Chance over in Baltimore. And you just keep an eye out, go periodically. If you have some broken tile, you keep an eye out, you go check periodically, and you can find exact matches sometimes. Definitely something a lot of previous generations ripped out these beautiful 1930s patterned colored tiles, and now everyone wants them back. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit about best practices. The first thing that I always say when we're talking about historic buildings is first, do no harm. In professional preservationist terms, we talk about reversibility. Anything that we do, we want to make sure that we can undo it without causing harm to the original building. Now, this is, of course, to within reason, right? Sometimes something's so far gone that if you don't do something, you're going to lose everything. So there's definitely an idea, though, how do we fix things or maintain things such that we can undo them, or such that it's as sympathetic as possible to the original construction. That means instead of using a bunch of Bondo on your historic wood banister, you maybe do a Dutchman, which is where you insert a piece of the same material in. So you would get a new piece of wood milled to the same profile and cut out the bad stuff and put in that good stuff. It also means maintaining your property. Paint for the exterior when you have a wood structure is critical to maintaining it. And it has to be something that you look at every day, not every day, every year you should be doing an analysis of your paint. You also need to keep within your capacities with DIY. I am a big time DIYer. I grew up watching This Old House, which I watched the other day. I was a little bit taken aback by some things now. But I definitely do like to do projects at my house. I'm willing to rewire a fixture. I am not willing to rewire my entire house. So you have to know where your limits are. There's certainly projects that you can do, especially the more like decorative ones, that you don't really need a lot of knowledge. And if you don't like the way it ends up, you just undo it. But certainly other things, rewiring, serious plumbing, those kinds of things, you probably want to leave those to a professional. And when you do bring in a professional, you want to make sure that you're hiring good professionals. And this is both easier and harder in this age than it's ever been before. It's easier because we have the internet, and we can research and Google and look into people and find, any kind of information about them online. But it's also harder because there's just so much coming at you online that it's really difficult to understand when someone just has a really good website or when someone's capable of doing really good work. So the best things to do, if you see someone who's doing good work, even if you don't need that kind of work right now, get their business card. Start yourself a little Rolodex. Yes, I am a millennial, but I do keep a Rolodex, a physical, actual Rolodex. And that way you can reference it. Ask your neighbors. If you have a neighbor who's recently done certain kinds of work, you can ask them, who did you use? If they like them, you're all set. You can call them, see if you like them as well, see if you can work together. If they didn't like them, that's also really important information, because they may have great advertising, but if they said, oh no, because, they didn't respect my historic windows, that's a really big piece of information to have. And then the other thing to note is that you have to understand the difference between hiccups that are uncontrollable in the industry, like my stove wasn't available for 20 weeks. Contractor can't control that. Versus when the stove arrived, they dropped it and broke it, and I had to wait another 20 weeks. And then, of course, you want to talk to multiple people, get multiple quotes, and get the references and call the references. Of course, they're not going to give you references to people who aren't going to recommend them, I would hope. But certainly talk to them and ask them more than just how were they to work with. Ask them specifics. Hey, This project's on a second story. Did you have anything similar to that situation? How did they access? Did they build scaffolding, or are they climbing up on ladders all over your house? Those kinds of things can be really important to know. And then the best and the most important thing is you don't need to reinvent the wheel. The government, the National Park Service Historic Technical Services Committee, excuse me, has created a series of preservation briefs. They started these a long time ago, and they update them every couple of years. There's a series, I think right now we're up to like 70 of them or so. And so they are publications that are specifically about the best way to repair and replace or maintain historic materials. Tons of different topics. Some of them are about really historic stuff, and some of them even about more modern built materials as well. So you can go through there, use that kind of as your guidance. If you talk to a contractor and you've looked at the wood restoration preservation brief, and the contractor is talking about replacing it all with PVC, you might not be wanting to hire that contractor for your historic house. All right, this is my favorite one. Historic houses are expensive to maintain. I've heard that so many times. You've probably all heard that a million times. I posit that the only reason historic houses are expensive to maintain is that most people don't maintain their not modern brand new houses. A historic house doesn't let you get away with ignoring it. A modern house that you buy, most people buy their house with an anticipation of living there for 3 to 5 years. And so they don't care about the condition of the roof. They may never clean the gutters, and they don't really look at the foundations. Once you get to the second or the third homeowner, even of brand new construction, that's when the problems start popping up that could have been prevented if they'd been maintained from the beginning. So yes, you do need to maintain your historic house. Yes, that costs money. So what do? You need to budget for your repairs. If you haven't bought a house already and you're looking at a house, consider what does it need to have done. This is where the inspection portion comes in. If it needs a brand new roof, do you have money for a brand new roof? If you don't, move on to the next house. There will be a next house. If it's something more minor, like my porch was sagging, okay, that's not an immediate need to replace. So can I spend that money in 6 months after I've bought the house and gone through all those expenses? If you have a current building and you've been in your house for a while, you can hire a home inspector without having a sale on the docket, because they can come in and with those fresh eyes, see all the little things you've kind of ignored over the years. And definitely gives you a chance to start budgeting, because you can get some information like, how long does this roof have? Does this roof have 5 years left, or does it have 6 months left? Do I need to replace it in 20 years or in 2? Those are all really important things for budgeting for those repairs. And then there's this concept called cyclical maintenance, which means that you go through the different systems of your house on a regular basis, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, depending on the actual system. And you make sure that it's actually being maintained. For example, your dryer vent should be cleaned once a year. Your roof should be inspected once a year. You should probably be painting every other year, maybe every third year if you don't have a massive southern exposure like I do. And so having those things on your list and regularly knowing when to check them helps you catch things before they become problems. If you're up on your roof once a year, or send someone else up there once a year, you'll catch a small piece of damage before it becomes an entire roof replacement. And trust me, that's a huge way to save money. And then, of course, there's your projects and your priorities. You have to take care of the structure of your house, and you have to keep water out. Does that mean I've waited 2 years to start my kitchen reno and I'm living in a 1990 kitchen with no dishwasher? Yes, yes, it does, because that's a nice to have and not a have to have. But when you prioritize your things like that, it really makes it easier to know where to put your money. If you've gotten distracted and started on a major kitchen reno and your roof is leaking, you're really doing yourself a disservice. So that's it from me, kind of a general overview. I do talk a little bit fast, so if you missed anything, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll catch them in the question and answer session.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. That was wonderful. I know it was funny. I was like, here are my bricks, in my house. Um, yeah, so I guess what are some suggestions that you have from your experience as to, good questions to ask contractors when you're first meeting with them to determine if they are, more pro historic or, less so interested in that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And one of them is to ask them, how are you with your historic buildings? Some people do a lot of projects in historic properties and have no understanding of how historic properties work. And that's a dangerous place because they'll have lots of historic houses on their website, and when it comes down to it, they're ripping stuff out. You can ask them things like, how do you feel about gut renos? If you ask a preservationist how they feel about a gut reno, the answer is likely to be only in the absolute worst case scenario where they came through the house in the 90s and already gutted it. If you're looking at people who present a kitchen and the kitchen looks exactly the same in every single one of their projects, you really have to question that. What did they have to do to the house in order to get there? Taking out walls has been really popular for a really long time, but there's a reason that historically rooms have walls. Privacy and being able to contain mess and those kinds of things. So you don't want to judge them too much on the design, but we want to see, like, what are they willing to do? If every project they have is a complete gut reno, they feel very comfortable with that. If they don't show any projects where they've restored elements of the structure, then you really have to worry about that. People who love historic buildings will let you know immediately. They'll talk about it. They'll tell you the things they're proud of. They'll tell you how, what creative solution they came up with to save a piece of history that someone else would have just ripped up and thrown away.
Yeah, that's great. Preservationists and people that just love old buildings will be sure to tell you. I think that's that's so true and kind of funny. Um, should I be concerned if a contractor is telling me I don't need a permit?
Mm. It depends. Interior work, unless you are doing structural or major electrical and plumbing, sometimes doesn't actually require a permit. It is important to know the rules in your area. And it's certainly something, if they're giving you a wink, wink, I would avoid that. But it's not a lie that some projects don't require a permit.
Yeah, and I would say it probably, you can always reach out to the office of, whatever
If
city
it's
or government.
exterior, and if it's exterior, it's something too, where a permit might not be needed. It might just be a staff review of your plan. I know a lot of people have this big, oh, you can't pay your house in a historic district. I haven't run into many historic districts where they really actually do dictate your house colors. There's some places where they make recommendations of house colors, and there's other places where there's no restriction. I'm in Alexandria's Old and Historic District. That's like for people around here, that in Capitol Hill. There's no restriction in Alexandria's Old and Historic District for what color you can paint your house. None whatsoever. There's this rumor that you can't paint your front door purple. Not a thing. They mentioned it once in the 1990s, and it's become this never-ending rumor that just won't go away. You can paint your house whatever colors you want. My house was gray when I bought it, gray and white, which is very, 2020s, let's sell this house kind of thing. It is now painted in the Victorian colors that you saw in the slide here. That's what the house looks like now, because that's what a historic color palette for this period would have been.
I love those colors.
Me
Uh,
too.
and yeah, there's no paint restrictions in Capitol Hill either. And we just did Zach actually did a presentation on Wednesday of this week about historic designation and what it means. So if you're interested in that, that should be up on our YouTube channel in a day or two. If you're confused about that. But we have a lot of other questions for you, Naomi. I have water damage on my exterior wall. I'm worried because my co-op building needs to be repointed. Could you talk a little bit more about old mortar and water damage?
Sure. So mortar is a sacrificial material. What that means is that it's supposed to fail. It's supposed to deteriorate over time. It's supposed to crumble and fall out. That is its intent. It acts as a cushion. I know it's really hard material and you're wondering how that's supposed to be a cushion, but that is its purpose. It absorbs the energy waves of movements, the car driving by, someone dropping a dumpster on the road on the other side, people walking past, the ground settling. And so repointing is one of those cyclical maintenance items that your co-op, you said a co-op, I believe, that your co-op should have on its budget ledger for each year. You might not be able to do the whole building at one time, depending on its size. So maybe it's something that every 4 years you inspect an elevation and you do that elevation. And then in 4 years, you come back and you look at it again. If it doesn't need more work that time, then you don't do it. Repointing can be complete, where you take all of the mortar out and redo it, or you can just do it in areas where there's an excessive amount of failure and it's no longer serving its function. Water is meant to flow in and out of our historic buildings. This is something that can be very difficult to kind of wrap your mind around. Water and air were supposed to move through our historic buildings. And one of the problems is that HVAC doesn't work so well when you have moisture and air moving through your building. So we really are asking a lot of our historic properties to ask them to not only shelter us, but also keep us at a comfortable 78 degrees. So some things to consider as someone with an older property is, has something been done that is preventing that water from moving where it's supposed to? If it's moving through your brick and not through the mortar, that's an issue and probably means that the mortar's too hard. If you're finding leaks on the interior, water is a slippery character. It may seem obvious that it's coming from the bricks, but that may not be the source of the water. Water moves, it follows pipes, it just goes the wrong places. Whenever you have a leak, to find the source of the leak can be really a challenge sometimes. So really bring someone out, have them look at it. They may be able to just do a little bit of repointing, get you stabilized until you guys can budget and save the money for a full restoration campaign. Doing a little bit and triaging is a really great way to start until you can get the funds together to do a bigger campaign. For example, here, we had some rotted wood when we first moved into the house. We triaged, we took care of the worst of the damage with an understanding that we're going to have to come back and do more work in a couple of years.
So we have a question about, and I'll respond to this from DCPL's perspective for DC, and then I'll let you answer, Naomi, on your own. Is there a list of local architects and contractors, especially oriented towards historical preservation? So DCPL does have a contractor database. However, those are just submitted to us. Those aren't vetted. That's really just a research starting point for you to be able to do your own research. So it's not, I wouldn't say just trust those people automatically. It's really just contractors in the DMV that have, submitted to us, and we've put that into a database for you. But again, please, do your research. Those aren't like approved by DCPL, but they are a collection on our end. But Naomi, I don't know if you have thoughts on that as well.
This kind of goes back to the whole idea of, if you're driving past a house that's a historic house and they're doing some kind of work that you need done on your house, stop and get their business card or take a photo of the sign that they have posted on the street. The hardest to find are honestly going to be your architect and your general contractor. And there's so much that goes into that process. Trust me, I just went through this looking for an architect for the kitchen reno. It's not just someone who's capable of doing the work, but it's also someone who's willing to work within your budget and who you get along with, honestly. So if you ever ask me specifically, hey, do you have a good mason? You're going to get 3 to 5 names, because I'm not going to recommend a mason to you. I'm going to tell you, here's a group of people. I'm also kind of a bad person to give recommendations for residential because all my work is commercial. So the masons I work with on a regular basis are doing multi-million-dollar projects. And I don't know too many of us with houses that have multi-millions of dollars of masonry to do.
Yeah, definitely. It can be an undertaking, but you can find somebody. My mother redid her historic floors in her Georgetown house, and she just loved the guy because he loved her floors so much. He was like, "These are so beautiful," and she was like, he can
Yes.
do it, and he did great. Um, can you talk more about old growth wood? I hear that mentioned quite a lot in historic properties, but I don't quite know what it means.
Sure. So old growth wood means the wood that was here basically when we got here. From merry old England, they had pretty much cleared out their tree stock when the first waves of immigrants were coming to this country. And so they found this United States that had a lot of significant lumber resources. And of course, the British and Germans and all those people, they thought, wow, this completely untouched wilderness. Well, we know that a lot of native tribes were actually cultivating the forests in order to keep them healthy and to provide this wonderful wood. Old growth wood is wood that has grown up grown up, that's a good enough phrase, in an environment where it's competing for resources, light and water. And therefore, it can't shoot up 7 or 8 feet in a year. It grows at a very slow pace. And you can tell how many years a tree has grown through counting the rings. I think everyone learned that in elementary school. So old growth wood grew up in these forests where it was fighting amongst all the other trees. And when it was a little tiny sapling, it has massive trees over top. And so the wood that actually survives to be these large logs that were harvested has rings that are super duper small, an eighth of an inch apart or less sometimes. Whereas modern wood that's farmed is planted every 3, 5, 8 feet apart, specifically so that it can grow tall and straight. Great, has a lot of purposes, but the problem for our purposes, especially for exterior use, is that those rings are very large and the space between the rings is very soft material. Depending on the species, it's softer than others, but that's where your termites get in and eat it. That's where the material can just fail over the course of time. So that's the difference between old growth, that nice, dense, thick growth, and it's heavier. You can feel the difference between an old 2x4 and a modern 2x4. And the thing is, when you're working in historic homes, you can see the difference over the course of time. A house from the 1700s, you feel the heaviness of that. A house from the 30s, it's still pretty good material. A house from the 60s, you start to see this kind of widening of the tree rings. And then everything since the 80s is just, I won't buy a house past the 1940s. Honestly, that's just me though.
Great explanation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think something else that I think about with old growth wood is that we can't grow it really
Can't
anymore.
replace it.
It's
And
not,
that's why it's such an important thing that you have resources that are harvesting old growth wood from structures that are no longer needed or useful to be reused in historic buildings. So you have a barn that someone's taking down. Yes, we're sad that the barn is coming down. That's a great vernacular resource, but we can't save every old barn. So let's do the most to reuse those materials. There's also the embodied energy in those materials. So I'm a big preservationist and a big environmentalist. The embodied energy in those materials is massive, and it will continue to serve its purpose if it's put into a new or an old building, much more than if we send it to landfill where it can deteriorate and send CO2 back into our atmosphere.
yes, and something, we say at DCPL all the time now, is that the greenest building is the one that's already built, and a lot of times it is going to serve you better, like you're saying, than modern build materials. Okay, so I don't know if you had mentioned this already in your presentation, a specific place, but do you have any suggestions on window replacement in a historic district? I'm not sure if that's for contractors or just for general operation, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm going to always recommend that you at least have your windows assessed for restoration if they're wood windows. And for that, I would send you to the Window Preservation Alliance. They have a list of active members, and window people are crazy people. I just have to say, like, historic people, historians are nerds, and historic preservationists are nerds. Window people are kind of scary, weird. They love each other. They love windows with a passion. But the Window Preservation Alliance, all their members have to meet some certain standards for window restoration. And so if you have a historic window that needs repair, they have a list of people all over the country, which is great because someone who's convenient to me might not be convenient to you. And the same thing where like personalities have to get along, budgets have to get along. And then if your windows have been replaced and you're looking for going to go back into a historic window or a wood window, you can try. A lot of windows, after a certain period of time, were kind of standardized in sizes. So if you have an 18th century house, not likely, but later 19th century, a lot of these parts were coming from catalogs, honestly. And you might be able to find some historic windows that have been removed from another property that would fit within your opening, or you could hire a contractor to make them fit within your opening. Or you could hire some of the people from the Window Preservation Alliance will also make new windows.
Yeah, and I will say we had last year around this time we did a webinar about historic windows. So our YouTube channel is a great resource for a lot of different, some of these topics that if you want more specifics on a certain aspect, we probably have a video or webinar on it on our YouTube channel as well. And I think we've done quite a few in-person Windows events as well. So if you sign up for our newsletter, I'm sure we'll be doing something something else about Windows very soon, but we have a lot of information on Windows as well on our YouTube channel.
They're so fun, and it's very satisfying to repair a
Yeah.
window because, like, wow, there's a window, you know.
Naomi, do you have any book recommendations on learning more about some or any of the topics that you discussed today?
Oh, wow. Yes. Oh, I wish I had thought of this sooner. I would have had my stack of books. So yes, there are a couple books out there. I think for preservationists, you're going to find that our Bible is a book. I think it might be too technical for the individual homeowners, but there are books that have been put out there. I'm sorry. Can I send you a list of books and have you share it, because I don't want to say something
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah,
But
absolutely. You can send it to
I have a
me.
whole bookcase that's only historic books, and
Oh
certainly
my
some
gosh.
that are aimed more towards homeowners rather than professionals.
Wonderful. Yeah, you can definitely send it to me and I'll send out, the link to our YouTube page and the contractor database again and all that great stuff in our follow-up email for sure. That'd be great. I think that was one of our last questions, unless anybody has a burning question for Naomi. Um, but otherwise, I think anybody going once, going twice. But thank you so much, Naomi. This was great.
Absolutely.
And I know we got a lot of great questions and answers out of the way, and I'll send out all the additional information. Um, oh, we have one more question. My auctioneering worked. Any tips for extensions on historical homes?
Ah, yes. Now, this is a huge topic amongst preservationists with regards to, do you make it look completely different from the historic building, or do you try to blend it in seamlessly so no one can tell? I'm on the side of make it modern, make it be different from what the historic property is, so that it's clear to the layperson that this is not part of your original building. There are ways to sensitively do additions to historic properties. If you have a door, you can usually make the doorway a little bit larger, and instead of tearing down the whole wall, you just use that door as a portal into your new space. That's one way that I find to be rather sensitive. A big thing to keep in mind, though, when you're adding to a historic structure is that your point of failure is always going to be where new meets old, because you have a seam there. And so I've seen a lot of, I call them facadectomies in DC, where they chop off the historic front of a building and then they build a new modern building. Those buildings are all going to fail right where the historic front meets the new construction. There are ways to prevent this, and it's 99% prevention. It's about maintaining the materials that are used between the old and the new. If you have joint sealants there, if you have gaskets or whatever the case may be. I like to use materials that are more subtle than the historic house if you're going to do that. If you're going to, if you have a beautiful brick house, maybe you do a small wood addition just to kind of bring down the scale of the quality of the materials that would have been there originally. Or maybe you do glass and steel and you go for something ultra modern. But keeping in mind, if you have a brick exterior, that brick has a little bit of shape to it, and steel is going to have something to help bridge that gap. And that's where your failure point's going to want to be. So yeah, I'm okay with extensions. I think that it's what keeps a historic building viable is for it to be something that you can continue to use into the future.
Great. I agree. Um, okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Naomi. I'm glad we had our final question. And you send me the stuff and I'll send it out. And this webinar will be up on YouTube in a day or two. But thank you again, and hope you have a great day and good luck with, I'm sure, your continuing restoration projects on your house. It looks beautiful. I love that pink color.
Thank you. If anyone wants to follow the adventures, I don't post often, but we do have an Instagram, which is called The Bottoms Preservation. This area used to be known as The Bottoms.
Oh, cool. I can send that out too in our email. That's great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.